Good afternoon. We're ready to get started here. So I'd like to first of all thank everyone for taking the time out of their schedule to attend this webinar. It should be between 30 to 45 minutes in length. As it says on the screen, there's a chat box that you'll see on your screen where you can enter questions, and then we'll be happy to answer those at the end of the presentation. What we're going to talk about today is how some of our newest automation modules that are compatible with the EasyPrep system will save you both time and money. Before we get to that, I'd like to thank all of our current EasyPrep customers with your support and votes. We were one of 5 finalists selected for new separation products of 2015, and by the Select Scientist Choice Awards that were awarded at the Pittsburgh conference earlier this year. And so it was quite an honor to be selected as a nominee, and we're happy that our customers felt that the product warranted that type of response. So again, thank you for your support. I want to spend just a couple minutes in case you aren't familiar with the CombiFlash EasyPrep system. It's a system that's capable of running both flash and high-performance preparative purifications. The specifications for this system are flow rates anywhere between, it says 1, but it really is 5 to 200 milliliters per minute on both the flash and the prep side. Pressures are up to 200 psi on the flash side and up to 3,500 psi on the prep side. There's a choice of the usual detectors, UV, UV-Vis, and you can add ELSD or mass spec detectors to the system. The system's very easy to switch between flash and prep. It's simply a 2-click process. Why would someone be interested in a CombiFlash EasyPrep system? Well, typically flash gives adequate separations for researchers probably about 80% of the time, and sometimes the other 20% of the time requires preparative HPLC where you have higher resolution columns. So this system allows you to run a flash cartridge, just like you normally would on any of our Teledyne NISCO's CombiFlash systems. But when you do need that extra resolving power, you simply select a column from the high-performance column database, and you can make a purification run on the high-pressure side. Now, typically, preparative HPLC systems have a little bit more sophisticated software than the PeakTrack has for the flash users, and we've brought that simple operation with PeakTrack over into the preparative HPLC usage. The other thing is that it gives you faster turnaround than if your corporation has a centralized service lab where you have to send your samples off. And then in addition to that, the last thing is that it uses minimal hood space. The EasyPrep system is about 3 inches wider than our standard RF, so it's about 17, 18 inches of bench space that's required. So it's still a minimal amount of hood space, especially when you compare it to several of the other preparative HPLC systems that are on the market today. Key features of the CombiFlash EasyPrep system: it uses high-pressure HPLC pumps. They run up to 3,500 psi, up to 150 mils per minute, and then that flow rate decreases down to 2,500 psi at 200 mils per minute. The same pumps are used on the flash side. There's just the software limits the pressure to 200 psi due to the bursting pressure of the plastic cartridges. Both sides have an auto prime feature, so that you don't have to don't have to reprime the lines manually when changing from one solvent to another. There's a high-pressure liquid loop injector on the preparative side that's electrically actuated so that, again, it's not a manual operation. And there's also a flash prep selection valve in the unit that automatically switches flow paths between flash and prep modes depending upon which column you select on our initial run screen. So let's talk about the automation options that we've just introduced and how they can save you some time and money. First, during a lot of our customer visits, we found that customers had interest in what was commonly referred to as autosamplers. When we asked how they were using the autosamplers, we found out that in many cases they were really using them what we've termed an auto-injector mode, and so we're introducing a very simple auto-injector here. An auto-injector provides automated repeat injections of the same sample, and we have limited that to up to 100 runs. So if you have a sample and you need to make multiple injections out of it, you can automatically inject up to 100 samples simultaneously without having to go back and do a repeat manual injections. The auto-injector is, if you're familiar with the Easy Prep system, this is the preparative injection valve, and mounted right behind it is the Auto-Injector module. And what this does is there's a simple line that comes over to the injector, and in place of this manual probe, we remove this and put in a probe that will go down into the user's sample vessel. And so then you simply program the unit, and it walks you through step-by-step instructions telling you when you need to place the sample probe into the sample matrix, and at the end it'll go through a series of wash steps to make sure that the sample probe is cleaned prior to introducing another sample to avoid cross-contamination. Auto-injector is a very simple operation. On the main, if you're familiar at all with any of the Combi Flash systems, on the main run screen there's a play button. When you push the play button, the second screen pops up, which is the minimum run requirement screen. And if the system has automatically detected the presence of the auto-injector pump, this little window in the center of the screen pops up. All you have to do is tell it how much, the total volume of the sample that you have in your flask or bottle or vial, and the number of injections you want to make. So if you, in this example, we have 5 milliliters of total sample. Want to do that over 3 injections. As a user, I've calculated the loading factor and found that to be acceptable. And so the system automatically calculates, and it tells you down here at the bottom that that will be 3 injections of 1.67 milliliters each. As soon as you click OK on this screen, it starts the equilibration and loading process, and that is the last that you have to have be in attendance at the operation of the system. The system will automatically go forward, do the 3 injections and the collections as the method that you've selected has been defined. One of the things we found that when we started automating the system was it becomes a little bit more complex in file management, because if I do 100 injections on an auto-injector, it generates 100 run files. And so what we have implemented to make life a little easier in that area is we've implemented what we call automatic incremented run file names. And so you can see over here, you see this where there's a plus on this screen. If you click that plus, then it breaks down into this type of list that you see up here. So if you click this minus sign, these files will all collapse, very similar to what you see in Microsoft Windows programs. And so what we've done here is you put in your initial sample name, and then we add this L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, and so forth to the run file name. So these are the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth injections in this example that were made. So this is a way that we're trying to clean up or simplify the run file management and display in the system. The other thing we've added on the results screen that's generated at the end of the purification process, we've added these two small arrows down here to the left and to the right. And so once I've picked my compound or run that I want to display, I can simply push these arrows and go backwards from that run or forward to that run. So if I pick the first run in that series that I just gave you the example, and then I click on the left or the right-hand arrow, it'll display each one of those runs one after another so that you can look at each run and make whatever determinations are required. Well, you might ask how it saves time and money. Well, one thing is that it allows you to purify samples that are larger than your column capacity, completely unattended. Sometimes you generate samples where if you're commonly using a 20 or a 30 millimeter ID prep column, you might have more material than can be purified in one injection. This allows you to program a number of injections instead of having to go out and buy a larger, expensive preparative column to handle, so that you can handle purification in a single injection. It also eliminates the need for a more costly autosampler when you're purifying large quantities of a single compound or a single mixture. And it allows you to perform automated injections. It doesn't take up any additional space in the hood. So the Auto-Injector module mounts directly on top of the column mounting stand. And so the width of the Easy Prep system is not increased at all. So again, some simple reasons to save some time, save some money, and not increase your space, and certainly increase your throughput on the Easy Prep system. The second automation module that we're introducing is an Autosampler. And we've kind of defined these, but an Autosampler is injections of multiple samples using different chromatographic conditions, possibly different chromatographic columns. And as I mentioned earlier, in some cases our customers actually that are doing preparative HPLC actually have an Autosampler, but they use it more in an Auto-Injector mode. But until the introduction of the Auto-Injector on the Easy Prep, there really wasn't that simple solution that was available. At the same time, there's other times when people actually need the Autosampler capabilities, and some of these are where there's multiple users sharing an Easy Prep system, such that they need to want to queue up their samples and walk off and leave the system for unattended operation. This is a picture of the Autosampler. What might look a little familiar to you, this is actually the same pump that's used in the Auto-Injector module, but we've added onto it a box here that holds some waste bottle for the liquid that's pulled out of the injection valve. And then also there's a space for two of these bottles. The other one is used for solvent that can be used to rinse the probe, sample probe on the Autosampler. The other thing is that this adds an additional 2 racks for fraction collection, so it doubles the fraction collection capacity of the Easy Prep. Uses the same racks as the Easy Prep, so they're totally interchangeable. The racks are, again, RFID coded so that they're identified, so that there's no possibility to put the wrong tubes in place. The system automatically recognizes that. And over here on the right-hand side of the Autosampler, you see this metal piece. This is actually the sample rack for samples that are to be injected. We'll talk a little bit about the options available to the user there in a moment. But the Autosampler allows you to queue up a number of samples. It allows you to specify the number of injections for each sample, injection volume for each sample. If you have our third option, automation option, which is a column selector that we'll give you a little bit more detail on in a few minutes, you can actually queue up the use of different columns and different methods associated with those columns. And so all of that can be done on a very simple user interface queue screen. The other thing that the queue screen allows you to do is to add new samples to the queue at any time. So once you've got a sample queued up and started, another user or even yourself can come back, and while that series of injections are running, you can add another sample to the queue screen so that when it's completed, it just continues on automatically. If someone has a hot sample that needs to be run on a priority basis, you can make that, you can enter the information for that sample and ask it to run that sample next after it finishes its current series of injections. And you can select the starting collection position for each series between either next tube or next rack. If you're a single user, you can maximize your tray or tube collection capabilities by simply starting your next purification injection in the next empty tube. On the other hand, if you're using this in a multi-user environment, you may want to select next rack so that your samples start in position 1 on the next rack that's available in the system. I don't know if how many people are familiar with the way the Easy Prep and the Combi Flash RF systems work, but there's something called hot swap, where once a rack is full, it can be removed and an empty rack replaced there, so that when you're through with collecting and you have all your racks full, it goes back to where you've replaced a rack and continues collection there. So you have a lot of hours of unattended operation where you just can simply replace racks to where they're unused. Talked a couple of times about the queue screen, and this is an example of the queue screen. Here you can put in the sample name, or if you actually click here, the system will generate a default sample name for you. Here's where you've selected the column and the appropriate method that you want to run from that column. And over here, it's very similar to what you saw for the Auto-Injector. First of all, my sample position in the sample rack. Secondly, my total sample volume and the number of injections. Now on this first line, this next tube really doesn't matter because it's going to start in whatever rack you specify on the run screen as being the first rack that you want to use. And you can use any one of the 4 racks for collection. And then here's your next line where we've told it we want to have 5 mils of sample. We want to start this run. This is essentially a run series where we're going to have two more injections. Those are going to start in the next rack. So however many racks are used up in this first set of samples, then when it moves to this one, it moves to a new rack, starts collecting there. If all the racks are full and no one's replaced a rack with an empty rack, the system will set and wait and give you a message that all the racks are full for you to continue. You can see here's another line where we're going to do one injection in position 3 of 1 mil of sample. Now, if I change this to the next tube, then if this rack, let's say filled, was half full, this would start in the next available position in that same rack as the second sample, or I can direct it to an additional rack in the system. Now, this bottom line here, there's no information, and so when you want to add another sample, you just click down here in any of these fields, and you can continue to add lines of information. So every time you start typing in this field, it'll generate a new one, so that this is continually available to add samples into the queue. If you click on this right radio button, or I'm not quite sure what you call this button, but if you click on this, you get a drop-down menu here, and one of the things is after you've programmed this line, you can tell it to run it next, and it will move it to the top of the queue. If your first injection here hasn't started yet, and you're just building your queue table, you can actually just tell it to run next, so it'll move completely to the top and be the first sample that's run. If this has started, and let's say you're on the first injection of the 2 that you're going to do, then this line will move up and it'll be placed between these 2 in the run sequence that will be executed. Or if you want to clean this all up and start all over, you can simply remove all rows and it'll wipe everything clean and just start off with a single line up here with no information in it. So I mentioned that there's 2 sample racks to choose from. Sample racks are located on the right-hand side of the unit, and they are a rack that holds either 13 millimeter tubes, which is 28 different samples, or 28 millimeter scintillation vials. These are 28 millimeter ID. They hold about 40 milliliters of sample, and there's 12 of those positions that are located here. Again, for ease of operation, the sample racks are also RFID tagged, so when they're placed in the Autosampler, the position is automatically known. Now, that does make one limitation, that you can't change sample racks in the queue. You have to work out of the same sample rack, so you can't change that partway through the queue process. And as I mentioned, it adds 2 additional fraction collector racks. It expands the Easy Prep to 4 racks. How's this going to save time and money? Well, one, it utilizes the PeakTrack simple software interface that ISCO's become known for. It's actually smaller. I didn't give you a dimension, but the fraction collector itself is 17 inches, the Autosampler itself is 17 inches wide. So the 2 systems together take up about 3 foot of bench space, sitting next to the Easy Prep. And when you look at other samplers on the market, that's still less foot space that's required when you start looking at the number of fraction collector samples. And again, it's expanded the fraction collection capability, so you can set it up for extended unattended operation. RFID on sample and fraction collectors allows you to mix rack sizes, and there's no possibility of making an error and losing sample by overfilling a tube. And the software also recognizes which racks are in place so that you can have error-free replacement of full racks during the separation process. Finally, the third product I'd like to talk about today is the column selector. This is a very simple process of allowing you to automatically switch between columns. And the column selector holds up to 4 columns, and the column diameters are anywhere from 10 to 50 millimeters in diameter, with links up to 250 millimeters in length. And in this particular configuration, they're mounted, it's bolted to the side of the Easy Prep, and we've removed the single column support tower and replaced it with this. What we have here is inside this housing is a pre-plumbed column selection, electrically actuated column selection valve. And down here you see these ports. These are the 4 ports that would go to the column, and down here would be the 4 ports where the line from the column goes back to the column selection valve. This port that's difficult to see here is where the common outlet from the valve would go back into the Easy Prep for UV detection. And so you can see we have these mounting brackets that are pretty flexible in how they have what size diameter columns they can hold. So there's a bracket that commonly holds a 20 millimeter column. This is a 30 millimeter column bracket. And then for a larger 50 millimeter column bracket, this is a Velcro band to strap that column in place. There's 3 rails here, and what these rails are for is for these column mounting brackets to slide back and forth on, and so you can position these on any one of these 3 rails to support the columns how you see best fit. There's also, if you want to make the system look very neat, there's a cover that goes over this. It's fitted over this so that this is all enclosed and kept away from dust. This is one of those automation add-ons that is really almost behind the scenes and never really seen. The only time you ever really interface with the column module is you go into our configuration screen and go to the Prep HPLC, and you'll see here where there's column position 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what you do here is you just simply define the column that you're going to put in those the different columns you're going to put in those 4 positions. And then in the lower half of the screen, you give it a name, and this name can be anything that's relative to you. One thing that we've added is that's been requested is a pressure limit. This is the upper pressure limit for the column. So if you're working with a column that is fragile and can be crushed under too high of pressures, you can set a lower pressure limit than what you would than the default 3,500 psi. Up here I should mention you can specify your loop size. This isn't really required. All it does is we do have some messages, warning messages, or that pop up. Typically the good chromatography dictates that when you're doing partial loop fills, you should not fill the loop more than 50% full. And so if you specify what your loop size is here on this screen, and you when you're setting up your queue and you say, well, it calculates that you're going to do a 3 mil injection and you've got a 5 milliliter loop, it comes up and says you're exceeding what the recommended loop volume is, or sample volume is. You can ignore that message and go on if you want, or if you didn't realize that, you can do one or two things. You can change to a different loop, or you can increase the number of injections to decrease the sample volume down to where it gives you supposedly better chromatography. The other thing is that there's a debubbler in the system to eliminate air from the lines when you mix water and methanol in reverse phase to gases. And this debubbler is used to pull off those bubbles, and so you can turn that on, off, or you can set it for what we call solvent-dependent mode. And in solvent-dependent mode, it looks at the solvent names that you've given your solvents, and if you've specified water or H2O or some other common names, it will actually automatically start the debubbling process. However, if you're running flash side and you're using hexane ethyl acetate, the debubbler will not run in that case because there is no gas generated. The other button here is a Define Methods button. And so now I've got this column and I want to define methods. I simply click on that, and it opens another screen where I can have assign a method name, and I can edit it so I can build my gradient profile, I can set my flow rates, I can set my detector options, I can set my fraction collector, whether I want to collect all, none, or just peaks. Then I can save this with different names. And so when I go to do an HPLC run, what I would get is when I picked my HPLC column, let's say I picked my C18 20 by 150 millimeter column, I wouldn't have to tell it that that's in position 1 based on this configuration screen. It would know that. But if I had multiple methods associated with that, as soon as I clicked on this, then it would pop up all the different methods that I had associated with this C18 20 by 150 millimeter column. So in this particular case, if you have, and you can do this if you don't have the column selector module as well, you can build multiple methods. So let's say I wanted to separate aspirin from caffeine. I might have a method that did that, and if I wanted to separate methyl paraben from ethyl paraben, I could have another method, and as long as the method names were unique between those two, they could both be associated with this one column. So when I select that column to do my injection from, it'll give me a drop down and a choice of the different methods that I can run that I have already programmed on that column. So it's a way to use a single column for multiple use, or in this case where you've got multiple columns with multiple methods, you can pick and choose what's appropriate for the sample that you want to purify. So the column selector reduces the chance for leaks caused by periodic changes of the columns. Every time you take a column off and put on, you're all aware that you can run the risk of not tightening a fitting properly. This eliminates that risk because the columns are all in position. You can use any of the 4 positions, can be used as a column bypass if you want to do that. Some customers like to run low pH and high pH and do a wash in between with neutral or non-buffered solvents, and so you can select one of the 4 positions and make that a column bypass where you just use a union to connect the inlet and outlet, so you don't have to go through a column. If you do a lot of taking columns on and off, it ends up taking quite a bit of time. That really doesn't seem like it at the time, but it all adds up. And this actually can be used in association with either the auto-injector or, more importantly, with the Autosampler. If you remember back to the Q screen where we had the column listed, well, you could have a different column, and so the column selector will know exactly which column position to move to select the column that you programmed it to go to in the Q screen. The other thing, in order to minimize bench space, this is an option. I showed you a photo where the column module was mounted to the side of the EasyPrep. This picture shows where the column module with the columns already installed in it are setting underneath the Autosampler. So if you want to hook everything up place it under the Autosampler, then it still is less than 3 feet of bench space for the total system. It's about 40 inches of bench space if you put the column module to the side, standing up and down to the Easy Prep. So I think we pretty well covered a lot of these points. The column selector allows you to switch between column sizes to match your compound size. That's something we didn't talk about actually. So if you've got a 1 gram of sample that you want to inject this time and 2 grams of sample you want to inject the next time, and you've got a 30 and a 50 millimeter column set up on the column selector, you can simply go to the column that is more appropriate for the amount of compound that you want to purify. We did talk about switching from high to low pH columns without disconnecting, and it's all under software control so that it can again be an automated process if you have an Autosampler involved. And we did talk about them minimizing the space required under the Autosampler. Just to go over our other products, this is a list of the RF family. RF-150 is a low-cost economical system that for non-automated operation. And then there's the RF Plus Lumen, RF Plus Pure Ion, which are all our flagship flash systems. The Lumen has an additional built-in ELSD. The Pure Ion is obviously the mass spec system that you see over here to the right, where the mass spec sets to the side. The Torrent down here is for purifying large quantities of samples with up to 3 kilocolumns and up to 1 liter a minute of operation. We have ReadySep RF Gold columns. We also have a line of ReadySep Prep columns, which are silica C18 and C4 wide pore. We have a line of fraction collectors, and we have a standalone 340 ELSD that is primarily used when operating with a torrent. All of those modules are compatible with iPhones, the iTouch, the iPad, and so status can be remotely monitored, as well as some basic changes made. You can change the gradient profile from your iPad or your iPhone without going back to the instrument. You can see if there's messages, let's say it runs out of solvent and stops, the system stops and puts up a message that there's insufficient solvent to continue. And you'll see that pop up on your iPad, and you can go back. It requires you obviously to go back to the lab to correct that condition, but at least you know it happened, and you can take action sooner than possibly if you were periodically checking on the system in the lab. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that we late last year we acquired a company called Softa that designed and manufactured a line of evaporative light scattering detectors for analytical purposes. They also build the ELSD that's in our flash systems. And so I'd invite you to contact us if you'd like more information, if you have running analytical work, because they're very economical units and have high detection limits. This is the model 1300. This is designed to fit in a stack like an Agilent 1200 series stack. So it doesn't take up any additional space. So if you want more information on that, please contact us. I'd like to make you aware of some upcoming chromatography webinars. We'll be mailing out invites when these get closer. We'll be talking later this summer about advances in evaporative light scattering detection in regards to analytical HPLC. We'll be covering reverse phase and flash. In the past, we've done a sample loadings technique webinar, and we'll be repeating that. later. About every 12 months we run an introduction to flash chromatography webinar for people that aren't familiar with flash, so that they can get an idea of what the benefits would be if they would choose to select. And so these are just some of the upcoming webinars we have planned. Lastly, I know this slide's a little busy, but wanted to remind everyone, if they don't have it, this Guidelines and Tactics for Flash Chromatography Handbook is free. You can ask for your copy simply by going onto our website, isco.com/flashguide, and we'll be happy to email your copy, or I believe you can download a PDF of the handbook at that time. Got a lot of good information in it as far as solvent selectivity between different solvents, solvent compatibility, that type of information. If you want more information, my contact information is there, or you can visit us at isco.com, or if you're in the U.S., our toll-free 800 number. And if you happen to be in San Francisco on the 19th of June, we'll be exhibiting at the HPLC 2016 Symposium. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance. Hopefully you found that there's some information here that's useful, and we'll be happy to see if we can answer some questions that you might have. Let's see, one question I had was that asking about whether these automation modules were available or retrofittable to current EasyPrep systems in the field. The answer to that is yes. It's a simple peak track version upgrade that will be posted out on the website. Actually, it might be on the website today. If not, it'll be out there shortly that you can download, and it will address. You can just simply purchase the Auto-Injector, for example, connect it to the USB port on the back of the EasyPrep, and then power up the EasyPrep, and it will automatically recognize it once you have as long as the software version is the latest software. Another question I had was, is the Autosampler compatible with the RF Plus? Unfortunately, the answer to that is no. I know we have some people would like to expand the fraction collection capability of an RF Plus, but this Autosampler, giving you 4 racks instead of 2, is only available on the EasyPrep. Let's see. There was one other question about when the automation modules are ready for customer shipment, and the answer to that is they are available at this point for customer shipment. So we've already we'll be shipping some of our first orders we've already received. We'll be shipping later in the month of June, before the end of June. I don't see any other questions, so again, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you have a good rest of your day and a good evening. Thank you.